Okay, everyone, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Today is the Core Dev meeting number 33, and if we look at the agenda, the first item is testing updates. So let's go ahead and go with Yoichi on that update, specifically because he has an update about the test at software. Hey everybody, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yes.
All right, so this is Core Dev meeting 33. I think I was on mute when I did the initial intro, let's go ahead and just get started on the agenda. The first item is testing updates, so we'll have Yoichi take that one. We'll see if Dimitri or others come in later, or if there's anyone else who has comments on it, but it's about test death and the breaking away from CPP Ethereum.
Oh, okay. So the C++ team had, so many of the C++ team had a meeting on this Monday, and so basically we split up repositories because the CPP Ethereum, yes, it's a client, and like many of CPP Ethereum developers are interested in making a better client. that can take on the role of the third or fourth major client. But CPP Ethereum repository contained also the code for generating the consensus tests. And these two developments were resembled like two projects in terms of the testing requirement. So if you want to run Travis tests on Mac OS or Windows, for consensus test generation, we don't want these and stuff like that. So there were some administrational differences. So we split the repositories for CPP Ethereum client and for the consensus test generation thing. And there was a new suggestion that the test generation should run on using any client, not just CPP Ethereum. For that, Dimitri started working on an RPC-based test generation. So currently, this test generation code is written in C++ and it directly calls CPP clients functions. But the next plan is to separate this into two different executables talking over an RPC so that test generation can run on any client that supports this RPC methods. Dimitri is figuring this out. And meanwhile, Dimitri and I are maintaining this test repository so that new tests can be still generated.
I was just wondering, Yoichi, have you already defined the RPC methods that will be required for this?
No, it's still an early stage. So the suggestion was made on Monday, and Dimitri expressed he wants to do it like on Monday and today again. So it's still very early.
Yoichi, in the same vein, we should talk and take a look at how we're running the consensus tests over JSON RPC for PyEVM. So we have a full test suite that actually runs the JSON test suites over an RPC connection. So it loads all the data with some special custom RPC endpoints and then tests them using standard RPC endpoints.
I see, that sounds great. So talk with Dimitri because yes, I mean, different people proposing similarly looking RPC methods is, so we want like a smaller number of methods that can do everything. So yeah, talk to Dimitri.
By the way, we also had a quick chat in Berlin on Wednesday that it would be nice to have a discussion with a few people specifically about somehow standardizing these methods among clients so that we can do something that's meaningful for all the clients. I think on Tuesday, that's scheduled for Tuesday, if anyone wants to join us.
For this one, the set of methods is already defined. So basically the methods that's used by Soltest, the testing suite for Solidity, so for testing Solidity, the compiled EVM bytecode must be tested in some client. And currently it's just among Solidity and CPP Ethereum, but if other clients support the same methods, Soltest can run on these clients as well. And this works as a test for Solidity as well as the clients. So it should be a win-win thing. And for this thing, the set of methods wanted is kind of already settled.
Cool. Are there any other comments? Okay, Martin, you just posted about the Hive test IP changing. Was there any other info on that other than the fact that it just changed?
No, I mean, earlier we had a URL hivetest.ifstats.net, but that one points to a dead link right now. So in case people are wondering why we are not running Hive tests anymore, we are. We just running in off that IP for now. That's it.
Okay, thanks. Are there any other testing updates that anyone wants to address? Okay. The next topic is EIP 867. So EIP 867 is an EIP that proposes that we have a standardized Ethereum recovery proposal system, or ERP. So the recovery of certain classes of lost funds can be submitted. So I'm going to just go ahead and have Dan, who's joining us. He's Pfeiffer-D on GitHub and the one of the people who proposed this. So he can go ahead. Dan, if you could give an outline of what this is, and then kind of an overview of where the conversation's gone the past week, so then we can kind of go from there.
Sure. So the major outline of the proposal sort of came together as I was talking to people in the Ether recovery channel. So I'm with Musiconomy. We were affected by the parity multisig issue. But I know that there's CIP 156 that was out there, and there was a different set of cases that were potentially could be addressed through that. There was some conversation on that issue about trying to include other cases, but it seemed like maybe it didn't all fit together. So as there was discussion going on in the Ether recovery channel, I think in the context of the original solution that was put forward by Parity, that had suggested maybe some EVM modifications. I think the big difficulty with that was that it would affect contracts that were already out there. They had some ways to maybe mitigate that, but it really looked like there was a lot of potential for unintended consequences with those EVM changes. And so the conversation in the Ether recovery channel sort of started to focus on irregular state change, in that it's something that can be well defined. It happens in a single block. The chances for unintended consequences because of that particular state change are smaller. And there are maybe also some other things that we can do to help with some additional verification. So what we ultimately came up with was that, okay, first of all, we make the assumption that there are these cases that people would like to see solved. And if that's the case, what cases could be solved by an irregular state change, and even what cases should be considered. And then if we were to say, okay, yes, maybe there are some cases, these certain types of cases that could be considered, what should that process look like, rather than having everybody say submit a change to each client that's is going to be coded, and it's going to be another if block somewhere in the code, and it's going to be technical debt. So is there a way that we can handle this to minimize the amount of effort that's associated with each one of these recovery proposals, and at the same time make sure that the verification process is very clear? So what we wanted was a transparent process that would allow some of these cases to be addressed. And what I tried to do in the proposal was be very clear about the types of cases that could be addressed, specifically where there's no one contesting the ownership of funds. Let's say I certainly would exclude any sort of case where someone says, "Hey, this guy, I sent him some ether and he didn't do what he said he was going to do, and now I want my ether back." And so there's a clear disagreement between the two directly affected parties. And so I try to say, okay, well, what about cases where there's no disagreement about directly affected parties? It's really just that there's some stuck ether, and if everybody would agree that, or everybody who's at least directly affected would agree that it would be better if XYZ happened. Is there some way to take those cases, a very narrow set of cases, and say, well, maybe we can address those? And I think the way I was thinking about this, there's a number of cases that have been talked about. There's the EIP 156 cases, there's the safe splitter cases, there's the parity multisig, there's another one with a client library that left off some padding or included some extra padding. I don't remember exactly the details, where I can't say for sure if all of those could be handled by this process. But if there were a way for them to essentially present their case, present their evidence that, hey, it's obvious what the right thing is to do here, who the true owner of it is, here's the set of actions, here's how I decided what addresses would be affected. So there's this verification script that's included. Um, so if we were to, narrow it down to this very small set of cases, is there some way that we could handle this? So the conversation in the EIP started off just about, whether there was maybe some conflict with the Ethereum philosophy on whether or not this should be done. And I think we've partly moved past that, although I think there's still certainly some questions, but we maybe are moving past the point where we'll have the proposal as a draft. That hasn't happened yet, but I think we're making progress in that direction. I think there's a lot of concern about a slippery slope. The other types of concerns are about cost and whether or not it's maintainable, or whether or not it's going to be too difficult to try and handle all these ERP requests. And I think any concerns that have to do with the resources, I think, are pretty straightforward to address, especially given the amount of funds that are locked up. I mean, even just in the Parity multisig alone, somewhere around $500 million at the moment. So I think if funding is an issue or resources is an issue, that's an easy problem to solve. And then the other thing that's brought up is maybe just risk. And so that's a lot of the process that was included in the ERP proposal was about how can we reduce risk? What are the things that we can put in place? So one of the conversations that came up was about some language in there that had some peer review type of process. And I think that was initially looked at as maybe selecting a special set of people that only they could do the validation. And I really put it in there because I thought, well, these types of proposals should be scrutinized very carefully. And so we may want to have some extra bar that people need to get over in order for them to even be considered for inclusion, that guarantees that the claims that they're making or helps to verify the claims that they're making. If there's a better way to do that, I'm certainly open to that, but that was the intent of including it. And I guess the other place where things maybe were not so clear was, I think I misunderstood the direction of causality in this process, and that the EIPs would be proposed and then approved, and then there's sort of this agreement that once an EIP is approved, that the clients will go and implement it. And I understand that that's not the way it necessarily happens, and it's more the other way around, that when clients agree, and they may have their own approval process, polling the community, however they do it, then that's when something gets marked as accepted. So I've updated the language in there to reflect that and make sure that I'm not attempting to give any additional, bureaucratic power to whoever the EIP editors or the people who are doing the verification. That wasn't my intent.
Okay, good. So, and just to be clear, what you're pushing for right now is only for this to be merged as a draft to then have further discussion included with it, right?
If that's if that's the process, that was my understanding, is that was the process. And so when it didn't get merged, I was concerned that that if it wasn't getting merged, that it was sort of influencing the discussion that would happen, because people would see, oh, this thing is blocked from even being merging. Maybe it's a bad idea, or I'll wait until it gets merged in order to give my opinion. I don't know. But if that's the standard procedure, that it should be unmerged until it's effectively accepted. That's what I didn't understand. Is I thought it would get merged unless there was some major issue, and then people could have a discussion. It would be draft, and so yeah, I think if that's the logical next step, then great. That would be happy to have that happen. But if you tell me that's not the way it really works, then that's okay too.
Yeah. So here I'll just give my opinion first, and then we can go around to the other editors and people in the room who have some comments. But basically, the biggest issue right now is the fact that there needs to be some updates to EIP1. There needs to be clarity on just what gets merged, how it gets merged, because the EIP process was initially left vague and pretty much a copy of the BIP's Bitcoin improvement proposal process. So after that, there has been a few times that it's been updated to more address Ethereum's needs, such as adding ERCs as a subtype of EIPs to be approved. There's also a path that an EIP takes from draft to acceptance, but as far as when it gets merged to the repository, that I have not seen that written anywhere as far as like after time X or thing X happens, it gets merged. It's more at the discretion of the editors, and so it's been very mixed what gets merged. So, for instance, ERC20, I think it was mentioned in the thread. I don't think that got merged for years after it was being widely used. Not because of anyone trying to brigade it or stop it from happening or anything like that. It just was the editor's just not merging it yet and everybody using it anyway. So there isn't that clear of a process right now for when things get merged. However, there's going to be soon a more clear process. So my recommendation would be to not merge it until that clear process is decided on over the next few weeks or month. I definitely don't want to drag this out because that could have unintended consequences on EIPs such as this one that might the time might be a factor in. And I mean, obviously, in cases of lost or stuck ether, time's not a factor and that the ether stays there, but time's a factor in that as time goes on, the decisions of the community might be swayed one way or the other as community members come and go. So it's now, in my opinion, a priority for people to, or for the EIP editors to change the process somewhat, make it more clear. And until then, I personally don't think it should be merged, but I definitely want other opinions in the room. But Dan, if you want to respond first, and then we'll get other opinions.
Yeah, I think that's fine if the process isn't clear right now. I mean, certainly it helps as if I'm still making edits, still getting feedback, to not have it merged. I think the biggest drawback is just it's hard for people to go and read it. They, if they know where to click in GitHub, that's fine. But for people who aren't familiar with that, maybe it might be difficult to go in there and figure out, okay, how do I actually read the thing? I saw some comments on Reddit that said, well, there's nothing there. And I think the issue is that they were just looking at comments and they couldn't see the actual content.
Yes, that's something we're somewhat addressing by a plan to have a cool front end, like a really neat, awesome thing where you can go to a website and it lists all of the EIPs in a way that's more human readable and doesn't require knowledge of GitHub or going through all the PRs and issues and searching for your thing is the plan, but that's going to take a lot longer. So in the meantime, what we can do to facilitate people like cases of yours that are unclear about the process is to update and improve the process.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think someone probably had a comment. Was that you, Peter?
No, so I just wanted to say that even now you can actually link to even inside the PR, you can link to a file within a PR. So you can, in theory, share it. But yes, it's a bit hard to share something that can be updated constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other comments?
I have a
I have a comment. Yeah, Brad.
Sure. So hi, I have a couple of comments. Firstly, like just in terms of this idea of like making it wait until the process is clarified, I think as long as it's not the case that the process so somehow it's important that the process for determining what the process is isn't biased by, say, for example, the editor's feelings about the particular proposal that we have to deal with, right? Like somehow the thing I'm concerned with is that like the process will be specifically derived not just to deal with this case, but to deal with this case with like and to bias the outcome. So somehow I'm not sure if as a general thing it makes sense to like pause and work out the process in response to a controversial EIP. However, I think that might be okay. I'm not saying it's not okay. It just is potentially if there's lack of clarity.
And the plan's been for a while to update everything.
Public process.
Yeah, the plans for a while has been to update the process. So this isn't spurned by the controversial EIP. I will admit, however, it's definitely put more pressure on it to go faster. So, I mean, there's always going to be a chance of biases creeping in with anything, and the best thing we can do is just stay open and transparent about this.
Yeah.
For
Yeah,
the process.
I think that's super important, and I think it's wait. Let me say one more thing, Yoichi, quickly. I think it is especially important for something like this, where it really does play deeply into this kind of important questions about like what is the nature of the blockchain, what is the relationship between the blockchain and the community, and how do we kind of like it does affect this question of like, you know, what is the philosophy of Ethereum, and so like in this these proposals, especially proposals that like do kind of, you know, set important precedents that like impact the relationship between the community and the platform, I think need to be subject to a tremendous amount of public debate that I'm not actually sure the EAPS process is designed to really handle. And as an example, let me just say that I mean, my recollection was that the DAO hard fork entirely happened outside of the EAPS process. I'm not sure if that's something we think was a good idea, but I think that was something that happened because the EAPS process wasn't set up to deal with that kind of existential, deep, like philosophical, kind of like important, fundamental, foundational questions about the relationship between the community and the protocol.
Nah, I think during the DAO, the biggest problem was the time pressure.
And so that's kind of true, but like, you know, we did have like well over a month. There was certainly enough to go through the EAPS process if that was what we were going to do, but we didn't, right? I'm not sure. Do people think that the EAPS process would have been appropriate venue for the DAO hard fork?
I don't think it would have been. I think the EAPS process is good, and we do have EAPS for the irregular state transition that happened, I believe. I could be wrong. So
yeah, I'm not sure if we do.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that more. But I definitely want Yoichi to be able to give some comments here. So go ahead, Yoichi.
Usually I merge EAPs whenever I can. Last week I merged one EAP, and the author of the EAP data complained to me he was still modifying the EAP. So I want to continue my usual thing because I don't want to be, particularly against a particular EAP. But then, so this time was my first time reviewing the process, meta EAP concerning the consensus forming process. And okay, well, and this was my first time looking at this Ethereum philosophy mentioned in EAP number 1. So EAP number 1 says an EAP editor can deny an EAP status for reasons including not in keeping with the Ethereum philosophy. Earlier this week, I thought this Ethereum philosophy refers to a document written by Vitalik in 2014. During that period, I refused to merge this EAP because that document was against having trusted operators at the helm. But I mean, at most like 30, 40 people deciding balance transfer seemed like at least at odds with this, that document, that philosophy document. But well, later this week, I noticed that this Ethereum philosophy mentioned in EAP number 1 was originally just copied and pasted from the Bitcoin document BIP 0001, and there it was like not in keeping with the Bitcoin philosophy, and then it was modified into the Ethereum philosophy. So now I'm not sure if this Ethereum philosophy mentioned in EAP number 1 refers to a particular document or not. And I wouldn't use this Ethereum philosophy clause unless I'm sure that most of the Ethereum community believes that's the Ethereum philosophy. And I don't have that kind of confidence anymore. So I don't use this Ethereum philosophy thing anymore. So then it's, for me, the same as the usual EAP. So after some spell checking, header format, and if it's well specified enough or not, and then I just merge as a draft.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good policy. And I mean, we'll talk about what the final process should be, but I mean, I think we should be getting in a habit of merging them personally. We need to talk with the other editors and get some feedback, but merging them as soon as the author wants them merged and it's formatted correctly sounds like a fair way to do it.
So I don't think the editors as a whole should do something special about it. So far, I mean, they were like, if editor is okay, they can merge it. And well, maybe later we find a problem, and then whatever happened, I don't know. But so far, it was like operated like that. So I'm as speaking. So that was I thought before I heard Hudson in this meeting. After hearing Hudson saying he wants to finish up the procedure first, okay, well, I mean, if the author of the EP is fine, I mean, I would wait.
Yeah, I think if this is something that's not uncommon, because I haven't followed too much the EIPs that have come out before and the process that's behind it. And my major concern was just if this is something irregular that's happened, then it's acting as a signal to the community, and that's maybe influencing the debate. If that's not the case, then it doesn't concern me so much if there's a good reason to leave it unmerged. I mean, certainly, as I mentioned, continuing to edit it will be much easier if it's not merged. And then once it is merged, I guess the conversation would move to an issue.
So that's how it used to be. Now it would just be that once it's merged, see, that's the thing. We gotta discuss how the best way to do that is, because we don't know at this point.
Let's leave it unmerged. We can actually Yuichi or any, if you maybe just want to comment on it, just say, this, we're going to leave this unmerged for now. The discussion can continue while we're figuring out how the flow should really be.
I think merging IP carries a little weight of this is official, this is accepted, and this is uncontroversial. And if there is a particular IP that's still very controversial or still being built, I don't think it should merge. I think that the fact that the ERC20 took so long to merge wasn't that much of a bad thing, because then it really was formatted. And I don't mean that only for the request for recovery, but even things like the next token. There are multiple token implementations that are being floated, and I think all of them are not merged. And I would say that the best way to merge something is after it has been tested in the wild. There are many implementations, and there are people using it, and because that also helps us set the correct standard. So I would say that in order for things to be merged, they should be uncontroversial, and they should start to be a bottom-up standard and not a top-down standard.
Do you think, I understand that for ERC 20, that sort of thing, but in cases where it relies on client modification, how could they be, in this particular proposal, how could it be out in the wild ahead of time?
Well, yeah, that's true. I would say that's for things that can be bottom up, and when it requires a hard fork, and it requires when the actual issue being accepted requires a hard fork and client implementation, then I would say that it's fair to say that. Well, but still, it should be uncontroversial, at least, I would say, or not very controversial.
In my understanding, the EAP repository is like Twitter. Everybody can say whatever they want, and I merge everything. That's my understanding currently. So it's very different.
I have some thoughts here on just that overall meta process. It seems like initially merging draft things is fine. Basically, once something is like met whatever the minimal standards are, it seems like merging something as draft is fine. And then at that point, you can continue a conversation in a separate pull request, at which point it's a lot easier to pick out the things that have changed from the original draft. It's a lot smaller set of changes. It might actually facilitate that sort of tweaking discussion that has to happen for those like minor rule changes, small changes to the EAP. So merging things prior to them being accepted, for implementation seems fine. And I feel like we still have a pretty good forum for continuing discussion just through a secondary pull request that modifies the EAP, even if that initial pull request is literally just changing the status to accepted, at which point the discussion can continue there.
Yeah, to draft, is that right? Or
yes, so like initially things get merged as draft once they're sort of, the author feels like it's a good starting point and all of the, various sort of minimum requirements have been met, after which a second pull request gets open, changing the status from draft to accepted, at which point that's where the sort of deeper discussion can happen on all the little tweaks that maybe need to happen,
I see.
that sort of thing.
Also, there is a status code rejected. So after pull request is merged as a draft, discussion can continue. And after everything is said and done, if it's found to be a bad idea, the status might change to rejected. And I think it's good to record that decision in the repository.
Yeah, there's also superseded, so that's another good one. So for instance, if there's a new token standard, there's going to be some discussion on whether it supersedes ERC20 or if it's just an alternate standard that then gets accepted to then be used by whoever wants to use it. So that's a whole nother discussion for another day. But so there's a lot of statuses we can use to make things clear once a PR has been merged. Any other comments on this topic?
Yeah, so basically I'm curious, as a discussion point for this meeting, was the meaning to discuss its merging or non-merging, or was the intention to discuss
it was primarily to discuss the process itself, and then any comments for the actual EAP itself would probably remain in the PR, is my thought.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and then once it gets a little bit more mature, probably, it's only been around for a week, and once it gets a bit more community support, bringing it up in another core dev meeting, I think would be very appropriate. So I think then, and also once we figure out the merging thing and just things kind of move along a little bit, we can bring it back up at a core dev meeting.
Okay, sounds good to me.
Just one, Alexei here. So one small thing. I would like to, if somebody hears this or somebody wants to make a public debate about it, I think that would be good, regardless of what the process is, because I understand what we're discussing here is just a kind of formality, which are not really important in this case. So yes, let's have a public debate about it, and just to figure out whether it's a good thing to do or not.
Yep, I agree, and I think that the best formats for that are going to be the GitHub PR, Reddit, Twitter, and the Ether Recovery Gitter channel. If I didn't already say that, I might have repeated that. And then anything else people feel is appropriate.
Yeah, I would actually suggest not going even beyond that. I think it's such an important topic. It should be debated like in a sort of live video or something. But I know it's not. It's beyond this meeting, beyond the preview of this meeting. But I'm just kind of a suggestion.
That's a good idea. Cool. Are there any other comments?
I'm sorry. I actually think that's a terrible idea.
Nice.
Relegating that debate to a live video basically puts people on the spot and makes this a politician-based thing rather than a let's have a careful discussion about it. So I think keeping it in text-based asynchronous formats is a much fairer way to do a contentious debate. Otherwise, it's a popularity contest.
it will become that whether you want it or not. So that's what I'm saying. We just rather do it right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, we can't do it today just because that wasn't part of the. Well, I have it listed as an agenda topic as far as the EAP itself, but this is more to resolve the process.
No, not today. What I meant is that I have a feeling that it will have to happen anyway. So
I see.
We
I see what
can't
you're saying.
escape from that.
Okay. Well, that remains to be seen. So either way, I think a video chat would be fun, but I see Piper's point as well. So just when it comes to that time, we'll figure it out. And I mean, we wouldn't be able to stop anyone from doing that kind of live video chat thing anyway. So yeah. Anyways, any other comments on that EIP? All right, cool. Thanks a lot, Dan, for coming on and explaining it and us working through this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for putting it on the agenda.
Okay, so item 3, fork release management in Constantinople. So Martin in the core dev channel posted some EIPs that with his understanding may be included in Constantinople. I wanted to go over those one by one, and in addition, I wanted to talk about if there's any other EIPs that would need to go into Constantinople. So let's start. And I updated this right before the meeting, so you might have to refresh the page to see them. But EIP 145 bitwise shifting instructions for the EVM. That one's pretty uncontroversial. Does anyone have any comments on that? We've pretty much said before that it can go in, but does anyone have any other comments on that? And I believe there were recently test cases written for that in C++ client. I might be wrong.
So there are a few test cases defined in the actual EAP, and I've implemented it as a pull request to get other test cases check out.
Perfect.
So
I'm sorry, Hudson, can you post the link to the discussion with the links of all the EAPs? I'm not finding it on the Skype channel.
Sure. Whoops, I did the wrong EIP, didn't I?
Posted it.
Oh, yep, that's actually
Thank
it.
you.
No problem. Any other comments on 145? Okay, and for any of these that we decide on that are approved for going into Constantinople previously and then confirmed in this meeting, we can update the chart on the EIP's repos README page. The second one is EIP 210.
I have a question
Sure.
regarding the test cases. So we have the test cases in the EIP itself, but do we have a process defining who's writing the actual state tests into the test repo, or how does that part work?
I don't think we have one. Anybody know?
So for Byzantium, what was happening was, so people find the test cases and told Dimitri or me, and Dimitri had a Google spreadsheet of test cases, and we were turning the Google spreadsheet green while we implementing the tests.
Spreadsheet sounds like a good idea.
right, but for the spreadsheet, that was more for coming up and writing down complex scenarios of the types of tests that should be needed. For something like the shifting operations, I think it's perfectly fine with just using the ones in the EAP, plus maybe a few more if there are any particularly interesting edge cases, which I don't know what they would be.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah, Axik, did that answer your question, or was your question more based on who's assigned to it?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, we have those test cases defined. It just needs to be translated into an actual state test, I think, in the test repo. So every client can test against it. Oh, and I think there was a second part to this, briefly mentioned last time, that in the test repo, there needs to be a new hard fork added called Constantinople, I suppose. And it needs to be generated, etc. I'm not really sure about the process there.
So Constantinople was once added and removed once, and I'm not sure if it's added again or not, but it should be now added and it should contain the bitwise shifting, I think so.
But actually, to answer your question, it's Dmitry and Richie would probably be the ones to make the actual test cases, right, Richie?
Yes.
And it also sounds like, oh, go ahead, Peter.
No, I just wanted to say that if a while back we were discussing that it's really hard to make new test cases, meaning that, for example, if while I am implementing an EIP and I find some really weird corner case for the Go implementation, it would be really awesome if I could just somehow create a test case that can be run against the other ones. And back then we were discussing that it would be nice if we could somehow figure out more streamlined approach. So maybe we could also discuss this when discussing the RPC, test generation RPC, whether we could somehow make it easy for anyone to make these little scripts that can generate tests.
Yeah, sure. So for instance, take a block and take a transaction, and if you can emit a test case, that would be great. Currently writing a test involves learning special format and so on, but every client developer knows how to interact with the chain. So if you can automatically create a test case out of an existing block in a private network, then it will be much easier.
Well, yeah, but that's exactly my point, that of course every one of us can make tests, but if it's going to take half an hour, that I'm simply not going to do it because it's just painful and it gets in the way. So if we could streamline it so that you could do it in maybe 3 minutes, then that would really help.
I see. Okay, 3 minutes is a good number to aim at. Yes, I agree.
And just to emphasize, I'm not saying that you guys should be the ones to figure it out or make this work. I think in general, in the ecosystem, we should somehow figure this out.
Of course, of course. Although, of course, we are happy. We ourselves would be happier with the better process. So, we are looking for one ourselves as well.
So another comment in general, I suppose we don't really have a proper timeline yet for the hard fork or any of these changes. But what should be, so if practically right now it's really hard for anyone not familiar with the test suite to create new test cases, what should we expect? What kind of time frame should we expect for the bitwise shifting test to appear in the state test? Is it a matter of 2 weeks, a month, or any kind of indication?
So, well, by the amount of work wise, it's a single day or 2 days thing. Most of it is so we're working with time zones and so on. So a pre-request stays overnight and so on. And then who starts doing that so that on top of pending tasks? And so it's not much of amount of time thing. It's more like getting attention and focusing. And you're right in bringing this up here.
I think there was already documentation on how to make test cases, right?
Yes, but after the recent organizational change, this documentation is now will soon be obsolete.
Okay, sounds good. So there just needs to be updates there. Axik, did you have other comments, or did that answer your question?
I guess it did answer for some parts, but not really.
Yeah, the timeline, I guess, is undecided for now, is what it sounds like.
This is not a topic for the core dev meeting, but since test has moved out of CPP Ethereum, maybe it deserves its own resources. But I mean, that's maybe an Ethereum Foundation internal organization stuff.
Yeah, I think mostly the foundation handles the test suite right now, or at least they employ everybody handling it. So that is the discussion for that.
Just as a side note, probably it would be really nice if we could have the test cases added by next core dev call, because then it seems we have like 2 implementations of.
I think I should keep adding the Byzantium test cases right now because it's on the mainnet already, and this affects the security of the main network. So this one has a priority.
Oh, we don't even have, or like.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, we but with the Byzantium we didn't have all the test cases done, so yeah, we're going to be working on those. So yeah, it's an undecided timeline, unfortunately, Axic.
Well, that's at least an answer. So I'm happy to have an answer.
Cool.
Thanks.
Cool. Any other comments on EIP 145? Okay. EIP 210 block hash refactoring. That's another one that Martin, and I agree with him, kind of implied was not very controversial. So let me go to block hash refactoring. That is that's a system contract, I believe, that reduces protocol complexity, it says, to process the block hash opcode. So one perspective I've heard on this is that it is a good stepping stone for pieces of Casper, since this would be the first blockchain system contract, and Casper itself is a blockchain system contract. Does anyone know if that's accurate or have comments on this EIP, if there's any discussion needed? Yeah, unfortunately, Vitalik's the last person to ask, but go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask for a high-level overview if somebody was able to give it.
I can't. Anyone?
Yeah, so what this EIP says is that at a certain fork number, there will suddenly appear a contract at address 20 or no, F0. And that's a contract. And it also specifies the code that will go in there, although that may change. And what this contract, and then afterwards, in each block, this contract is called before any other transactions. A call is made from some system address. The call is made to this contract, and the call data contains the previous block hash. And once 256 blocks, I think that's the number, has passed since the fork, invocation of the opcode block hash will instead be a call to this contract. And what this contract does is that it saves block hashes in state instead of requiring the clients explicitly to maintain this little cache of the last 256. And I think, but I'm not sure, that this contract contains older block hashes than only the 256 most recent ones. But I must say, I haven't actually looked that hard. I don't remember the contract mechanic.
That's plenty. I was just looking for kind of exactly what you said, a high level implementation. Cool.
So
sorry, I had just a quick question on this one as well, Hudson.
Sure.
Is it also true, if anyone knows, like the Casper system contract, that there'd be no gas for calls to this contract as well? Because that would be an interesting first case as well.
So there will be gas if you call it. When it's called by the system contract before any transactions, then there will be no gas. But So if you call block hash opcode, it will increase. So the suggestion is to increase it from cost 20 gas into costing 800. And we don't know exactly what if you actually execute the opcodes one by one, then it will be something else. So I would guess that if you call it by the block hash opcode, you get a fixed price of, say, 800. And if you call it explicitly by address, I would guess that you get the actual gas consumed.
I can give some clarifications. At least what I understand there is it should be able to cover more than 256 hashes, but there were different implementations storing them in a different way, and as a result, if calling the block hash opcode, that would still be limited to 256 items, and it would have a fixed cost, the 800 you have mentioned. But a contract would be able to directly call the contract and retrieve more information if it supports storing more than 256 hashes. And that would have just a regular cost of calling. But the actual cost of the contract was, well, the actual cost of the contract would be, it's a normal EVM contract, so it's just regularly calculated. But I think maybe Lane's question was more like, what happens to the first transaction in every block? Does it have a gas cost or is it free? But I don't think there was an answer to this.
Should be free, otherwise the system contract will go just to pronounce 0, and after that this block hash will not be updated.
Yeah, I guess it's free.
I think we can have that discussion on the EAP, but in general, it doesn't sound like there's any controversy over this EAP.
Yeah.
What version of bytecode should be used is was the last controversy.
Oh, yeah. So I actually, that brings me to a comment that Pavel made 10 days ago. It's at the very bottom of the pull request for this EAP. And it says that the code still has a bug, and that he wants to write unit tests for the contract, and that he'd like to implement it in Julia to estimate the lower boundary of the gas consumption. Am I saying that right, Julia?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So it sounds like the bytecode would be generated from Julia at this point, but that's not a definite. That's just what he's proposing.
So he has actually made unit tests, but there were different. I think after he made them, there was a different proposed contract code, and I also implemented them in Julia/Julia. But I don't think it's up to date because there were so many different proposed versions of the code.
Okay, so that just needs to be figured out in the EAP. And it sounds like there isn't that many, there's not really that much controversy over this, so I don't see why this wouldn't go in. Anybody else have comments or any reason why this wouldn't go into Constantinople? Okay. Next, we have EIP 168 and 169 for killing dust accounts. That's one that Gav came up with. I don't know if there's an updated EAP besides that. And I know that there were some discussion in the core dev chat about just how much this would help, as far as, what was it? Where was that?
Hudson, if you want, I can just quickly summarize what we were talking about.
Oh,
I think
perfect,
it was
yeah.
yesterday. it's Alexei here. So basically, we're asked, we want an assessment of how much saving in disk space or whatever this change will bring. And I think Andre from the C++ team has already did some analysis, but this analysis only covers the number of accounts which could be deleted to certain threshold of the like what considered to be dust, and it's actually attached to the AIP. So what I'm planning to do in the next couple of days is that I have a code which could analyze how many nodes in the actual state tree would be removed if at the different thresholds, and I will post that graph so for everybody to see, so that we can make more informed decision on whether this AIP brings enough improvement to justify the implementation. That's it for me.
Okay, cool. So there just needs to be more analysis done, it sounds like. So this isn't anything that's definitely going in.
Yes, so we also had a discussion about this internally, and this EIP is a bit interesting and it's problematic because the original proposal that Gavin made, I think he said that he proposed that any account that has less than 420 sabo should be deleted. And I'm not sure where I saw the exact number. Somebody says that that would amount to about 45 cents currently. And I think this really highlights the issue, the core issue with this CIP, in that how do you define a threshold which is a good enough threshold in the future too? Because, for example, if you would propose now that we delete everybody's account who has less than 45 cents, then the entire ecosystem would blow up. What do you mean? Because all of a sudden, something that was 1.5 years ago an insignificant sum now became, well, I wouldn't call 45 cents significant, but still, it's not insignificant anymore.
Well, it suffices to say that the original Gavin proposal was made in November 2016, and it's 40. And back then, 42 Ether was about $10, and 420 Zabo was less than a cent. And right now, it is 400. It is 42 cents, and of
yes,
course.
So that's exactly the problem with the proposal, yeah. That it doesn't. So it may or may not scale into the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that sounds like, to summarize, there needs to be more analysis of the actual benefits of the clearing, and also whether or not this is sustainable for future price movements, etc., that would potentially make that amount of Zabo more or less valuable.
Yeah, and for example, Felix had so way back. I know this is off the table currently, but just to mention it, there was some proposal that whether or not Ethereum should or should not, for example, collect rent from contracts or from accounts. And it's an interesting concept that if Ethereum were to go down the rent approach, then all of a sudden you don't need to clean up dust accounts anymore, because all these accounts would eventually run out of rent and get deleted anyway. Now, this is obviously a completely different discussion. I just brought it up that there might be different solutions to that haven't been yet considered.
I also noticed that because it only deals with accounts, never deletes contracts, so it might encourage people to either create wallets that they didn't necessarily need to hold small amounts of money, or to use a wrapped F as a token, which in the end might even use more disk space and not necessarily bring. So it might encourage behaviors that in the end might make people use even more disk space, but that disk space is in contracts, not in the accounts.
Okay, so at this point we can definitely say that this will not be going into Constantinople at this time without some refactoring and analysis, obviously.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it shouldn't go into Constantinople, for example, because it's a simple enough solution for a problem. Just it's important to know that it's not a future-proof solution, and it should be discussed what the future will hold for this EIP.
Good point. Thanks. Any other comments on that one?
I think it's interesting to note from, I posted a graph that Alexei posted to the EAP, that there are 10 million accounts with balance 0. So I'm guessing they're not counted as empty because they're non-zero nonce, right? So I mean, if we changed emptiness, I mean, we could basically set the threshold at 0 instead of 420 Shabo if we wanted to. Oh, it was okay. Yeah, right. Didn't that? Oh. Anyway,
there's an interesting problem with contracts. So what happens if, for example, I have a contract, I suicide it, I have a contract, I move all the funds out, suicide it, and then redeploy it with different code.
How could you redeploy? Oh, you mean with the new account abstraction or what?
Oh yeah, of course it needs. Yes, sorry. But yeah, if account abstraction comes into play, then we have funky stuff.
But this, I mean, this proposal
if you delete the nonces, then
with
you
nonce
redeploy
application.
Sorry.
Okay, only one of you go.
I was just saying that I think your point is that if you delete nonces, then you get to redeploy suicided contracts.
So this EAP, which the next one, 169, discusses how to deal with that. That's the account replay protection. It's also by Gavin, and it has 3 different variants to how we deal with the replay protection problem.
Yeah, so yeah, anyway, yeah, I guess it boils down to how account abstraction would work. Indeed.
And that actually happens to be the next thing. Haha. So, any other comments on that before we move on to account abstraction? Cool. So, EAP 859 was created by Vitalik as an update to one of his previous EAPs about account abstraction. That EAP was a culmination of ideas, or my understanding is that it is updated based on feedback he got from an ETH research forum. So right now, account abstraction is still up in the air. There's people who are very in favor of account abstraction just because they don't see the point of having a whole hard fork for minimal changes, and that something this important should go in. What's everyone's opinion on account abstraction? And I can start collecting these in the notes so that we don't have to repeat this conversation over and over again.
Yeah, as for me, I would say that I think we need more people to read up the details about this and think about what consequences it would have, because it's I think the implementation of this looks kind of complex. That the contract creation is a 2-step thing where it's created and then it's called, and there are 2 different kinds of data in the transaction. There's the init code, which is what you would get during init code execution if you made a call data copy. And then there is data, which is what you get in the second part if you do call data copy. And yeah, it's. I mean, I think it's complex to cover every aspect of this in one sitting. So I really would like to see some more discussion about this EAP in general among the core developers.
Is this EIP prerequisite for any of the future changes in the roadmap, like Casper or sharding?
I think Vitalik should. I mean, when we discuss this, we ought to have Vitalik on the line to answer questions that I'm not really sure.
Yeah, if I remember correctly from the last call, he said it wasn't required, but it would make. I think he said it would make something easier. I forgot which one.
I think more in general, the entire community and ecosystem would prefer this abstraction, because all of a sudden then you can do a lot of stuff that are currently not necessarily impossible, but really, really hard, for example, to have a contract pay for its own fees. Currently, you can only do that if you have some special setup with a mining pool, etc. And this would actually make that possible, which immediately would make a lot of applications possible.
I agree. I think there's widespread community support for this, because I've seen it referenced when people reference the roadmap and reference things coming up in the future, and a lot of the dApp developers, I should say, are pretty excited about it. From my experience.
The reason I was asking this question is not out of the skepticism, but it's whether we could say that the tracks of working on this AIP and the tracks of Casper development can go in parallel, so that there is no impression that we have to do this first before we can go to Casper. So we can actually do both in parallel, and then whatever comes first will come first.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, yeah, I'm not sure on that one.
Just from a client developer perspective, I would probably be happier if we would select a few EIPs that we would like to ship next and focus on those rather than trying to do concurrent stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like we've picked at least 2 of them today, and they don't.
Well, okay, but those two are fairly easy. But what I meant currently is that account abstraction in itself is a lot of work probably, and a lot of things to test, and same goes for the scaling solutions. So I think it would be nice to figure out whether we want the next hard fork to focus on scaling or to focus on account abstraction and stick to it.
So
for minor EIPs, it doesn't matter.
The thing is, though, that there's no EIP right now. So basically, there's no scaling solution that's an EIP right now until sharding, which would be beyond the Constantinople hard fork. So I guess I'm not sure what you're referring to when you say focus on either scaling or this for the next hard fork.
Well, so, okay, I meant more like, for example, Casper.
Oh, okay, so yeah,
you have the Casper test network. And then my suggestion would be that if we want, we should either focus on, for example, getting the account abstraction done for the next hard fork and do something with it. Or if we decide that we want to push Casper, then maybe we should focus on that front and ship it as fast as possible instead of getting lost between both changes.
I see. Okay, that's a good point.
What is the implementation state of account abstraction? Weren't we almost finished and then in the end postponed it because the consequences for the infrastructure were not clear?
So yes and no, because now we're talking about different types of account abstraction. The one you're talking about is ETH86, and that was even more complex because it allowed stuff like paying for your transaction with the ERC20 tokens or whatever's. This is a different variant. And that's also good to be aware of it. I mean, if the community wants account abstraction, you should be aware that this proposal does not include paying with the random things you need to pay with Ether.
But essentially, the previous proposal was binned.
And one of the reasons it was binned was that you could do a reorg attack where someone created his own multisig, and then malicious miner did a reorg, and suddenly someone else owned that exact contract. And I think this proposal does not suffer from that because the structure, yeah, you can read my comment on the ETH. But there are complexities that we should weed out.
My opinion is that I think that the AP that Vitalik's proposing is important. And I think a lot of developers are waiting for some account abstraction. But my opinion is that the way it is described is very technical, and it makes it hard for outsiders to contribute. So maybe if someone could try to do a write-up on it and try to get more feedback from just like normal developers, not just core client developers and consensus developers, it might help bring more attention and discussion to that.
I'm a bit unsure about that at the current point. I mean, it's always nice to gather community feedback, but I think that was one of the biggest issues with the original EIP86 that everybody wanted it, everybody liked it, just nobody from the client developer teams actually put the effort in to implement it. And then after everything was said and done, and we figured that, yeah, we should definitely implement it, it turned out that it's really, really messy. So my suggestion would be that first let's try to pick something that is technically feasible and then work on the little details.
It wouldn't be a waste. Yeah, it wouldn't be a waste of time to fully flesh out the EIP, even if it does not end up being implemented in Constantinople. Cool. Any other comments on that? Yeah, suffice to say that one is at this point not officially going into Constantinople and needs a lot more discussion. All right, the last agenda topic is client and research updates. So let me go ahead and go to the list of clients. So the first one, we'll go with Geth. Have any updates or things you want to announce?
Well, so basically since this year we've mostly been working on the try rewrite Discaio stuff. Those have all landed already on master. Currently we are just polishing and finalizing master. We do know of a few bugs that we need still to squash, which are currently preventing us from releasing, but I would really, really like to release hopefully beginning of next week, although we may have to, I don't know. So we're targeting a new release for next week. And we really hope that it will also fix all the light client issues, which I'm hoping people will be happy about.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Okay, thank you. CPP Ethereum? Actually, who would speak on that? Christian, maybe.
I guess Yoichi knows more. So I think most of the people are.
So what I can do is try look around the office to fetch Andre. So wait for a few minutes.
Okay, sounds great.
I guess removal of test ETH is one of the updates. We already heard about that.
Totally. Yeah, and I'll go on to the next clients until we can get Andre on here. Next, Parody. I think Afri.
Yes, hi. Not much updates from Parity right now. We have a security audit incoming. We just published a blog post this morning. Yeah, we started to improve the light client. It's really overdue. And last but not least, it might be worth to mention that our next release will come without any wallet interface, any user interface. Yeah, and we need to, we are starting to split off the user interface in a standalone Electron wallet. Might be interesting for someone following the wallet development. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Harmony?
Yeah, working on Casper. So the validator code is almost written, and we are trying to test and debug all that is done so far. But the problem is that we can't connect with the PyEth app. So trying to solve the problems with the PyEth app guys. That's it for Casper, and working on performance improvements, still working on that. And I can say that we have a stable version, which is just a reminder that we have a problem with the too long database flushes, and now we have a stable version where database flush 100 times faster than in the version which we have in the master branch. So the only one problem left here is a large memory footprint. It's about 4 gigabytes. We'd like to reduce it to 2 gigabytes or something about that. And then we'd like to make a release. So I hope it will be soon, or yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Trinity?
We are quickly approaching our first public alpha release that'll be able to run a sort of minimalistic light client, and sharding implementation continues to plow forward.
Cool. Is anyone from Ethereum JS available?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, Axic. Great.
Yeah, so basically, most of the development happened in the VM implementation, and there was a major release made last week, which was the only release made since the Byzantium hard fork. And this one fixes a lot of different things. Some of the changes started out as performance increase changes, but they ended up being cleaning up the code significantly. It should be much easier to understand what's going on. It did fix a lot of potential consensus bugs on certain edge cases. And it fixed a couple of other issues which have been experienced by Truffle. So contract testing should be, under certain circumstances, should be much easier and or better with this release. And after the release, there was some work on running code coverage tests, code coverage reports while running the state tests. And doing that, we have found, I think, a list of like 10 different items where we believed that the tests weren't covering certain edge cases. But then it turned out that the state tests used by the VM were still from, I think, around October. So we did an update to the latest version of the state test repo, which was hard to figure out what is the actual latest version of it and what is the latest stable version of it. And it seemed like the information we got from Yoichi and Dimitri is whatever version used by CPP Ethereum is the latest version of the state tests. So we have updated to that version, and the VM isn't successfully passing all of them. So work is being done in fixing those issues now. And after those are fixed, hopefully we're going to get a more accurate coverage report.
Okay, thank you. TurboGeth?
Yes, so I'm currently dealing with fixing all the tests that exist in the Go Ethereum repository. So before, I'm probably gonna need to add some more. And also, I'm running the test on how does it behave on the hard drive sync. At the moment, it's pretty promising. It's actually no difference with the speed with SSD, but I still have to test it through the spam blocks, which is going to be very interesting. And yeah, so I don't know when this whole thing is going to be stable enough, but yes, the work is going on.
Okay, thank you. Is there any updates from research? Vitalik's not here. Lane, you talk with the research team sometimes. Do you have anything that you're able to definitively say?
What can I say? I met with Xiaowei today, and we sort of had a chat about sharding, and it's continuing apace. There was a little bit of concern about the discussion we had on the last meeting about the phases and the stages. I think there's a little bit of confusion here about some of the terminology, and there have been a little bit of misrepresentation on the part of some media or something about it being a bit further along than it actually is. And so I think just that it's still kind of quite early, but things are going well. That's all I have on the research side.
So things went a bit silent. As Hudson, are you still here?
Yep, I was talking and I was on mute. No, I was saying, yeah, there was some confusion from a CoinDesk article, but there was some people trying to clear that up in some of the Reddit threads, so I think that's passed. But in the future, we can try to be more definitive with some media outlets about what stage we're at with that. So yeah, thanks for that.
I guess.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks, Hudson. Yeah, sorry, one other thing came to mind. It may be worth mentioning as well that I also understand that there's a little bit of trouble, as was discussed last time, getting some of the Casper testnet stuff working on Pi Ethereum. And Piper, you may be able to speak to this a bit better than I can, but if at any point it would be possible to move that stuff over to Pi EVM. I know we're kind of not there yet. We may not be anywhere near that point yet, but I guess that may be a possibility to relieve some of the P2P issues.
That's something that we're like basically validating, and part of the basically we're working on validating that we can sustain a healthy network using the Trinity networking code. And if that turns out to be the case, and we can validate that base assumption, then I think that the Casper research is going to migrate over. But we want to validate that initial assumption first to make sure that we don't do the migration work and then have the same problems.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks everybody for the updates. Are there any other comments or anything, any other topics we didn't reach?
Can I actually ask? I have two questions. One is aimed at Piper. So you said that Trinity would be releasing soon a public alpha with the Light client. Are you using, which Light client protocol are you using?
I think LES2.
Okay.
Is our preferred one?
No, no, just asking that if you are using LES2, well, for one thing, LES1 will probably be dead really soon, so definitely don't use that one. As for LES2, if you have actually a client running or usable, I would really appreciate if you could send us any usage issues or anything that you see to help it.
Absolutely, I will be in communication if anything comes up that that causes us issues.
Sweet. And my other question was directed toward Alexei. You said that I was looking at the TurboGeth charts, and the numbers are kind of impressive, but as far as I know, you kind of store everything in memory, which currently leads to a 65 gigabyte memory usage.
Yeah, so at the moment, it's the numbers are kind of unrealistic. So because they do require you to have a huge amount of memory. However, I'm doing some testing with the realistic amounts of memory, and I'll publish them later because, yeah. So I agree that this is a this is an unrealistic thing. Although, I mean, we'll see how it goes. I think it won't be too far ahead, too far off from the current numbers, but I will publish when I have them.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm really curious about that one because I've read a lot of the optimization and the ideas that you had were really nice. Just this memory footprint really scared me because I didn't see it as scalable. But if you are actually working on pulling those numbers down, then I'm really curious.
Yes, I will definitely let you know when I have a new set of numbers and we can have a chat about it.
Okay, sounds good. Any other comments? Okay, thanks everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.